Good day to all. This is Gillian Bienvenuto, and for today I'll be speaking about specificity. First, what is specificity? Specificity is the way in which browsers will decide which CSS property values or declaration will be applied in a specific element in our HTML file based on the most relevant selectors. How does it works? So sometimes in our CSS declarations or in our CSS files, we might have like a lot of selector that is targeting just a single element. So what specificity do is to weigh those selector type and choose the most relevant selector. Okay. And if there are multiple declarations that have equal specificity, the last one will be applied. And specificity will only be applied if there are multiple declarations that are targeting a single element. Next is the selector types. So I have 4 selector types listed in here, and I'll be discussing all of them. The first one is the type selector. So for type selector, if we want a uniform styles for a specific element, for example, here in our HTML file we have span, we have 2 span, and we want both of them to have the same styles, so we can just of course use this type selector. So we will just put the name of the element on our CSS declaration or CSS file, and then of course the declaration that we have will be applied in all of those elements. Okay, so for example, if we have a lot of paragraph and we want all of them to have like the same style, so we can just of course use this type selector. The second one is the class selector. So if we want an element or to have a unique styles, okay, like for example, we have paragraphs in here and we want all of those to have unique styles, so we can use this class selector. For example, on our first paragraph we have the class name blue, and for the second paragraph we have the blue and the yellow BG or background, and for the third we have the class name blue and fancy. So we can apply these declarations to those classes. For example, here we only have blue, so yeah, the text will have blue. And then for the second one we have the 2 classes, blue and the yellow background. That's why our text have blue color and the background is yellow. And for the third we have the fancy, so this style or declaration was applied to this third paragraph. And on the last, because it doesn't have any class names, that's why it has the default style. And for the third one, we have the ID selector. So ID selector is just like the class selector, but this one will only be for a single element. Okay, so it will specifically choose an element with this ID or this ID name. For example, we have the name of the ID identify for this div. Okay, so we can call upon this um, element, this specific element, by calling its ID name, identify, and yeah, so it will be chosen. Okay, so we can only use an ID for a single element. And the fourth one is the attribute selector. So here we have the div with the attribute ID A. Okay, and here it has more weight than just, of course, mentioning or having the name of the element. So when we have the attribute selector, it will be more specific, or it will have more specificity than, of course, just the single element. Okay, but of course the ID selector has more weight than the attribute selector. And the next one is parent element. So to make an element more specific or has more specificity, we can also put the name of the parent elements or the elements previous to the element that we want to select. Okay, for example, here we have the div and we want to select the span, so we choose the div. And because we have the ID name sample, that's why it has more weight than just, of course, the single element or the name of the single element, or just mentioning the parent elements. Okay. Proximity. So thus proximity affects specificity. So as we can see here, proximity doesn't affect specificity. Okay, so if we reference a name of the previous element, like here we have HTML H1. Okay, so it's quite far than the body H1, but why do we have the purple? Okay, so here the reason for that is that the purple or the HTML H1 was declared last. That's why it was applied on this heading. Okay, it is not because of proximity. So you can see here, you have the green for body H1 because this one is declared last. Yeah, we switch these two. This one is declared last. That's why it has the green color. Okay, and of course we can also see that if we put the name of a previous element, it has a more weight or specificity than just, of course, mentioning the name of this element. Okay. And for specificity hierarchy, okay, the IDs has more specificity, or it is more specific. So if we're going to put the name of the ID, it will have, or it will be applied more than those with just, of course, the class names or the attributes or the pseudo classes. And the classes, attributes, and pseudo classes has more weight or specificity than just um, elements and the pseudo elements. Okay, so that's my report about specificity, and these are my references for this presentation. So I hope you understand my presentation, and yeah, that's it.